Hello and welcome to A Picture in 1,000 Words. My name is Michael Fiedler. The title of this episode is, If Something is True, Does It Matter Who Said It? Now, unlike some of my previous episodes, this one is a little darker. This one may push some buttons. This one may penetrate a little deeper. And I think that that's healthy. I think that it's good to get beneath the surface and to really probe and shake the foundation of our assumptions, because I think that that's ultimately helpful for growth. So first, I want to provide some context of where this idea first came from. And that starts with the Kevin Spacey quote on the center to the left of, if you're lucky enough to do well, it's your responsibility to send the elevator back down. And I really loved this quote, and I used it in my career counseling talks. A little backstory on me, I did some and continue to do career counseling for PhD professionals who leave grad school and are trying to find themselves in the corporate world. And for those interested in medical communications, which is what I chose to do, I would give them give them guidance on how best to package themselves. And I would always end with this quote. And I really loved it because it really spoke to what I was doing there, and sort of in a pay it forward mentality of, I had some modicum of success and I was just trying to share my learnings, and my message as I left that group was to do the same. And a couple of years in, though, it comes out that Kevin Spacey had assaulted, or at least been accused of assaulting, several men over the course of several decades. And overnight, he became this persona non grata, and he was really exiled from the public life. And that really bothered me because I had this great quote and this great message that I still believed in, that was still true, but now I couldn't use it because the person who had said it had committed some misbehavior. And that really frustrated me. I'm like, well, does that matter? Or that just was unsatisfying for me. And I went looking and being like, well, this is not the only example of this. And so I went looking for people who had really committed or had been accused of committing something really heinous, and wondered what truth they had to share. And that's what this slide is intended to illustrate, some truth and wisdom that I believe has value, while coming from somebody who maybe has some scrupulous essence about them. So above Kevin Spacey on the left is Louis C.K., who for a long time, and still continues to be, a really celebrated character in the comedic world, but also as a thinker. He has really profound ways of looking at life, and one of them is, if you can survive disappointment, nothing can beat you. And I find this to be a really inspiring quote, because it ultimately says that if you can step outside your comfort zone and handle getting a bucket of cold water dumped on you, you'll be okay. You will be able to survive essentially anything, because you can survive that essence of feeling of failure, and you can pick yourself up again and continue moving forward. And that rejection, while painful, doesn't limit your capacity to go out there and achieve greatness, even though maybe you didn't get it on the first try. And I think his spirit is one to make people a little tougher and more resilient. And I think we can all learn from that, even though he was accused by several women of sexual misconduct. Now, to his right is a woman by the name of Asia Argento, who's an actress and actually a leader of the Me Too movement, but herself was accused of by a male minor of sexual assault. And her quote, what you might see as depravity, is just another aspect of the human condition. And just so you guys know, I didn't know what depravity meant when I first saw this, but it means wickedness or moral corruption. So what you might see as wickedness is just another aspect of the human condition. I think is a really profound quote, because it says that just because somebody does something wicked and awful, that doesn't mean that they're wicked and awful. It just means that they're human. We all have a capacity to be awful, terrible human beings, just like we have the capacity to be amazing and benevolent human beings. And it doesn't mean that you should be demonized and exiled. It just means that you're human. And even she herself, I mean, I can't really comment on how aggressive or sinister her motivations may have been, but she really calls to the fact that if you do something terrible, it likely just means that you're a human being. It doesn't mean that you're some demonistic, evil cretin. You're just a person. And I think that there's value there. And going down to the far lower left, that's Charlie Rose, who was a very well-respected journalist and moderator of presidential debates. And his quote is, "The question is just as important as the answer." And I glean a special wisdom from this because I'm a professionally trained moderator. I have been put in positions where I step in front of a small group of people and curate conversation on a particular topic, largely healthcare and pharmaceutical investigation. And oftentimes, if you're trying to steer conversation effectively and really get good and salient points out, the question is so critical, because if you ask a question that is flat and uninspired, you're going to get an answer that's flat and uninspired. But if you ask a question that's really cleverly worded or nuanced or really sets up an expert to give a really profound answer, that really defines its value, and it can sometimes be even more important, or at least as important as the answer. And so that's something that I take personal wisdom from because I use it in my professional life. Moving to his right is probably someone who is seen as the most evil person in Hollywood, which is why the effects that I chose are the most grotesque, is Harvey Weinstein. And when I was working on this project, I would just choose somebody and then Google quotes by that person. And actually, I used the Weinstein effect to find some of these people in the first place. And Harvey didn't have too many great quotes, but one of them is, "People love a true story, especially a true story where two people from opposite worlds come together." Now, that's not a particularly sophisticated quote, but it's true. It's Romeo and Juliet, essentially. And so this is a person who made a lot of successful films, who has a truism about what it means to be, what it takes to make a successful story, or at least one aspect of a successful story, one approach. But this person has been charged and for a whole host of heinous activity and deserves to be punished to the full extent of the law. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean that his words aren't true. It doesn't mean that what he said can't have some value attached to it. And that's what the whole point of this whole episode is really separating truth from the person who said it. And the exclamation point in all of this is the person above him, which is Donald Trump, who is the most infamous sexual assailant out there right now. He's been accused by 19 women, maybe more, of sexual misconduct. And his quote that I like is, "It's always good to be underestimated," which is true. For years leading up to his presidency, people didn't take him seriously. They're like, "Nah, this guy's got no chance. He's just a clown, no big deal." And now he's the president of the United States. And I think that it's wise for people to take stock in what he has to say, particularly those people that don't like him, if only as a means to beat him at his own game. And so just tuning him out, I'm not saying you have to listen to everything he says, but if you can find some value in what he has to say, you can gain some element of wisdom and truth in that and use it to your advantage. And so I take this as, it is always good to be underestimated. And let's take a lesson from somebody whom we may not agree with and beat him in his own game. And that's essentially the message from all of these instances is, can you separate truth, something that you can use to your own advantage, wisdom essentially, and can you divorce that from how you feel about that person as an individual? Can you separate wisdom from morality? Because wisdom is useful. Wisdom can be applied in your own life, and it can make your life better, and it shouldn't matter who it came from. So in terms of effects that I was using here, the primary one is all of these image manipulations. And if you just click on an image in PowerPoint, there are color manipulations, artistic manipulations, where you can kind of modify what the picture looks like. And so I did that, and also chose not to put names on the slide because I wanted to take these people and obscure them in some way. Because the truth can oftentimes be obscured. The truth isn't always crystal clear. At least sometimes we don't want it to be crystal clear because we have biases and opinions and misgivings about it. And so that's sort of the intent here. There's also some inward shadows, some soft edges on the lower left there. And also an effect where if you take a rectangular box, and this is the case for the two images at the top, Asia and Louis C.K., and have a gradient fill. So like if in terms of the background here, it's a white background, you have a gradient fill where the box that you're using is white, and then the other color that you use for a gradient is can be any color, but you just make it clear. And then you can have this fade, which gives it that blended look rather than having a stark bottom of the picture, which doesn't look as nice. Anyway, so that's essentially this episode. I hope you weren't too offended by it. I hope you can handle it, because if you can survive disappointment, then nothing can beat you.